And joining me live to decode the latest situation in the West Asia conflict is Piotr Kurzin from Italy. He's a geopolitical and international policy professor. Good evening and welcome to WION. I want to start by asking you, Piotr, what you make of the latest visuals that are coming out of Tehran. You know, these are images where Iran's top leadership, whether it's political or religious, are being seen marching on the streets, clearly a symbol that Iran wants to give to Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I think that this is a demonstration by one side to the other that this system is relatively okay. There was one assessment done by the New York Times and some other intelligence services in the United States that essentially said that the system as a whole, which is what you need to be damaged or destroyed for effective regime change, hasn't really changed. Yes, Khamenei and some large members of the original IRGC, previous government, if you like, were destroyed in the initial airstrikes by Israel. But clearly we have a functioning state. Is it battered and bruised from the continual airstrikes of the coalition? Yes, it is. But this is not a country that looks on the verge of collapse or some massive uprising. Now, to be fair, we can always question these sorts of public gatherings. Are they state-funded? Are they organized by the Islamic Republic? But the point being is that the goals of the Israeli and United States to, show the eventual disintegration, it's not happening.
What are these goals? You know, the entire world, Piotr, has been talking about these goals, the objectives of America and Israel. First, they said it's regime change. Then they moved to the term called regime adjustment. Now they're saying there's nothing left to hit in Tehran, but we won't leave. What is the aim? Does anybody know what the objectives of these attacks by Israel and America really are?
Well, that's a key question, because I think that the two have different objectives. If you look back at America's engagement with Middle Eastern affairs, or specifically Iran, it's always been a little bit more restrained or unsure than Israel, especially under this very ultra-nationalist government that runs Israel. So Israel wants to go all out. It wants to continue to bombard and deal with the Islamic Republic, because they represent the existential threat for Israel, much like Israel is the existential threat for Iran. So they want to continue this, whatever it is. But America doesn't. And I think that in the past 10 days, the Trump administration have been trying to find walkbacks. So effectively saying, we've achieved some significant goals, but now we're happy to sort of talk to the senior people again, or, as you said, regime adjustment, regime modification, or another term that is used in the West, leadership change. So when Trump removed Maduro from Venezuela, he kept much of Maduro's government in place. But the problem with this comparison is that Venezuela is not the Islamic Republic, and the Islamic Republic is much more militarized, it's more ideologically driven, and it has a much stronger antipathy or dislike of the United States and Israel. So the goals are not clear, because the two sides undertaking this war are not completely united, and they're not achieving their intended objectives. Certainly on an operational level, they've achieved some things, but strategically, it's not clear.
You know, it's interesting that when you talk about unity, Piotr, let's also bring in NATO and the European Union into this picture. And a short while back, NATO, I believe, has downed a third Iranian ballistic missile over Turkey. That's what reports are stating at the moment. But as far as NATO is concerned, Europe is concerned, they haven't really directly joined this conflict, despite the fact that there have been certain attacks on American bases in these very countries as well. Where do you see NATO's role in this picture? Do you see them directly joining the conflict just, as we complete 2 weeks?
It's a difficult question. I was working on an analysis video for my YouTube channel about this, because I don't think Iran really wants to bring in Turkey, because if you do bring in Turkey, then you do, in theory, activate Article 4, which is consultations, or Turkey could seek to activate Article 4. So basically NATO is a very complex organization. It has a lot of different members, and they consult on what might be a suitable response. They did this in the summer after Putin was launching attacks and strikes across, or provocations, as the media called it, in parts of Eastern Europe. But nothing really happened. In this regard, everyone talks about Article 5. Will NATO get fully involved? I don't see that very realistic. Just because you're part of NATO doesn't mean you have to activate the alliance as a whole. And there's certainly a lot of countries in Europe which have no interest in this. Spain, obviously. I'm in Italy, and there's a lot of people in Italy who want Italy to do the same as Spain, prevent America using their bases. And Italy has the southern NATO command just outside Naples, so that would be a huge hindrance to the American operation. But very simply, I think if Europe were to get involved in any way, the French have this aircraft carrier, the British are sending HMS Dragon. It's going to be in a defensive capacity. You mentioned in your report about Saudi Arabia intercepting drones, but they haven't gotten into airstrikes into Iran. So in my opinion, I think European nations are largely going to be here in a defensive capacity. So they're going to protect things. If Iran does decide to strike Cyprus or Turkey, then they'll defend themselves. But I'm not sure they want to get involved with the actual airstrikes and operations in Iran.
Just a few hours back, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has said that she stands against this war. She's also said something on the lines of the fact that this war has been illegal on part of Israel and America, and therefore, Europe has been sort of criticizing the move, but they haven't really directly criticized the US president or the Israeli Prime Minister for this kind of a decision.
No, they haven't, and this is where, I'm English, but I'm a very big fan of Europe, get frustrated, because I think we need to be consistent in our messaging, right? If we're going to talk about international law and democracy and these sorts of messages, which I think has made a lot of people in the global south frustrated and angry at the hypocrisy, then we need to be consistent in our messaging and our action. And I appreciate Italy because they've been critical of Russia, right, before the war in Ukraine, but they're also being critical of the United States and Israel, which I think is correct. This war is completely unnecessary, and whilst I'm not a fan of Khamenei and the Islamic Republic, and I would like the Iranian people to have greater choice or self-determination, what they're doing isn't necessarily the best way to do it. Mojtaba, his son, who's replaced him, is arguably more extreme, has even closer relationships with the IRGC, which could make the Iranian country more like a security or police state, which would be much worse for the Iranian people. And so I think that Europe needs to get a hold of where it sits on these issues. And it is largely illegal because Donald Trump didn't seek approval from Congress for such a large scale and in a sustained campaign.
Not just the approval from the Congress, he is, of course, as you said, being questioned on following and implementing international law and guidelines. That clearly is something that has been forgotten in this entire conflict. I'll leave it there. Bertha, thanks very much for joining us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Thank you very much.